first time he came to my door, I thought he had the wrong address. That happens once in a while if you live in an apartment complex where every building looks the same. Mine was a 3-story brick building with 8 units, and all the entrance doors faced the same narrow parking lot. If you were new there or just not paying attention, it would not have been hard to confuse Building C with Building D. That was why I did not think much of it at first. I was 20 and living alone for the first time. I had moved into that apartment at the start of the school year because it was close to campus and cheap enough that I could cover my half with 2 part-time jobs. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I had almost the exact same routine. I got back from class around 5:30, changed clothes, heated something up for dinner, and stayed in for the rest of the night, unless I had work. That Thursday in November, I had just sat down on the couch with leftover pasta when there was a knock at the door. I looked through the peephole and saw a man in the hall holding a folded piece of paper. He looked to be in his 40s, wearing a dark windbreaker and jeans. Nothing about him stood out except that he was standing very close to the door. I opened it with the chain still on. He looked at me and said, "You moved your car." I said, "What?" He lifted the paper slightly and said, "You moved your car. I was looking for you." I told him I thought he had the wrong apartment. He frowned like I was the one being confusing. "No," he said. "You live here." It was such a simple statement that I almost laughed. I said, "I do live here." Then he nodded and said, "Right. So, why did you move your car?" I told him again that I thought he had the wrong person. For a few seconds, he just stared at me. Then he said, "You had the blue Honda." I said, "I don't own a Honda." That was when his whole expression flattened. Not angry, just blank. He folded the paper once more, put it in his jacket pocket and said, "Okay." Then he turned and walked away. I locked the door and went back to the couch feeling more confused than scared. My first thought was that maybe he was looking for a previous tenant. The apartment had been vacant for a month before I moved in. Maybe somebody he knew had lived there before and switched cars. Still, it sat wrong with me. The next evening, I came home from work around 8:15 and found him standing by the mailboxes in the lobby. He was not checking mail. He was just standing there facing the glass entrance doors. The second I came in, he looked at me and said, "There you are." I stopped walking. He took one step toward me and held up the same folded paper. "I wrote it down wrong yesterday," he said. "It was a Corolla, not a Honda." I did not even answer the car part this time. I just said, "Why are you here?" He looked genuinely confused. "I told you," he said. "I've been trying to get a hold of you." Then he said, "My unit number." Not loudly, just in the same flat tone. I asked how he knew what unit I was in. He looked at me for a second and said, "Because you live here." That was the first moment I felt actual fear. I told him to leave me alone and went upstairs without waiting for an answer. When I looked over the railing from the second-floor landing, he was still in the lobby looking up. I called my friend Nina and told her what happened. She asked if I knew his name. I said no. She told me to text her every time I got home for a few days and to stop opening the door if he came back. For about a week, I did not see him. Then, on the next Thursday, I got home and found a grocery bag hanging from my doorknob. Inside were 2 things, a loaf of bread and a note. The note said, "You forgot these." I had not forgotten bread. I had not been grocery shopping at all. I carried the bag straight to the dumpster without bringing it inside. The next day, I left for class earlier than usual and came back in the afternoon because one of my lectures had been canceled. As I pulled into the lot, I saw him sitting in a car 2 rows over. Engine off. Window cracked slightly. He was watching the entrance to my building. I did not park. I drove right back out and circled the block twice before coming in again. By then, the car was gone. That evening, I told the woman across the hall about him. She listened, then said something that made everything worse. She said, Is he the guy who keeps asking if you moved back in? I asked what she meant. She told me that twice in the previous month, a man matching his description had knocked on her door and asked whether the girl in 2B was back yet. She assumed he meant some former tenant and had told him she did not know. I lived in 2B. That meant he had been asking about me before I even noticed him. The next time he came to the door, I did not open it at all. "You left your kitchen light on." I was standing in the dark living room when he said it. The kitchen light was on. He had either seen it through the side window by the stairs, or he already knew the layout of the apartment well enough to guess where I would be at that hour. I stayed completely still. "You still have the same table by the wall." That made the hair on my arm stand up. The kitchen table was against the wall directly beneath the side window. You could only know that if you had looked in, or been inside before. He stayed outside for maybe a minute after that. No pounding, no yelling, just standing there. Then his footsteps went back down the hall. I waited until I could not hear him anymore, and then checked every lock, even though I had already checked them earlier. That was when I noticed the bathroom window was unlocked. I almost never use that window. It was painted shut half the time anyway. But the latch was unhooked, and the screen had a small tear at the bottom corner that I knew had not been there before. I did not sleep there that night. I packed a backpack, took my laptop, and stayed with Nina for 3 days. When I came back with my uncle to pick up more clothes, the apartment looked normal except for one thing. There was a folded piece of paper slid under the bathroom sink cabinet. It was a copy of the floor plan from the apartment website. My unit was circled. So was the bathroom window. At the top, in the same plain handwriting as the bread note, were 4 words. "This is still yours." I moved out 2 weeks later. I never found out who he was or why he kept insisting that apartment belonged to me in the way he meant it. Maybe he knew someone who lived there before. Maybe he confused me with someone else and built the rest into something that made sense only to him. What I do know is that he was not just knocking on the wrong door. He was correcting his own mistakes as he learned my routine. The car I drove, the times I came home, which light I turned on first. And once someone starts learning those things, wrong house stops sounding like a mistake. The first couple came just after noon. I was home alone that Saturday because my parents had gone to stay with my grandmother for the weekend, and my younger brother was away at a tournament with one of his friends' families. I stayed behind because I had a shift at the restaurant that evening, and the plan was simple. I would leave around 4:30, work until close, then come home to an empty house and do the same thing again the next morning. Nothing about the day felt unusual until I heard tires on the driveway. I looked out the front window, expecting to see one of our neighbors backing up, or maybe someone turning around. Instead, a gray SUV stopped behind my mother's car, and a man and woman got out. The woman was holding a folder. The man had his phone in one hand and kept glancing at the house like he was checking it against something. Then they walked to the porch. I opened the inside door, but kept the storm door shut. The woman smiled and said, "Hi, we're here for the 1 o'clock showing." I just stared at her. "The what?" I asked. "The house," she said. Like that should have been obvious. "We spoke to the owner this morning." I told them there had to be some mistake because my family lived there. The man frowned, then held up his phone. On the screen was a rental listing with photos of our house. The front porch was ours. The backyard was ours. The detached shed in back was ours. The price was low enough that even I knew it would get attention fast. I told them the listing was fake. The woman's expression changed from polite to confused. "Are you the current tenant?" That was when I realized how strange I probably looked from their side. I was 19, in sweatpants, standing inside a house they had apparently been told was vacant. I said, No. I live here with my parents. The man scrolled on his phone and said, the owner told us his nephew might be here. That line stuck with me, not because it sounded convincing, because it explained why they had shown up willing to believe me and not believe me at the same time. Whoever posted the ad had already prepared them for someone answering the door. I told them again they had been scammed and that they needed to contact whoever posted it. They left slowly, and I could tell they still were not completely sure. As soon as they drove away, I looked up the listing myself. It was real. Same address, same outside photos, same claim that the house had been recently vacated and was available for immediate move-in. The interior photos were not ours, though. The kitchen was too modern. The living room had different windows. Whoever made the ad had mixed real exterior shots of our house with fake interior photos from somewhere else. There was a contact number and a message button. I called the number. Straight to voicemail. I texted my mom screenshots. She called right away, and at first she thought I had misunderstood something. Then I sent her the link. She went quiet for a second and told me not to let anyone inside for any reason. I tried reporting the listing, but the site only said it would be reviewed. 20 minutes later, another car pulled in. This time, it was one guy by himself in a work truck. He came to the porch holding a printed copy of the ad and asked if I was the nephew. I said no. He asked if the owner had left a key. I said no. He told me he had already sent Martin the deposit that morning. Martin was not my father's name. That was when the whole thing started feeling less like a mistake and more like a setup. By 1:30, I had taped a sheet of printer paper to the storm door that said, "House not for rent." Listing is fake. It did not help much. Most people still knocked. Some just wanted to ask if they could walk around the yard since they had driven so far. One man insisted on knowing whether the basement apartment was included. We did not even have a basement apartment. Another couple asked if they could at least see the garage because the listing mentioned storage space. The worst part was that the visitors were not the threat. They were just confused. The threat was whoever kept sending them, because the listing stayed up. And around 2:15, I got a message through the site from someone asking if the 3 o'clock showing was still available. Whoever was doing this was still active. I called my friend Nolan and told him what was happening. He said he would come over and stay with me until I had to leave for work. Just hearing that made me feel better. While I waited for him, I checked all the windows and doors, even though they were already locked. At the side gate, I noticed something I knew had not been there that morning. A strip of blue painter's tape was stuck to the fence post at eye level. I peeled it off and turned it over. Nothing written on it, just a clean piece of tape pressed on carefully enough that it felt intentional. That put me on edge in a way the fake listing had not. The ad could have been posted by anyone, anywhere. The tape meant someone had physically been on our property. I went back inside, locked the side door again, and looked through the kitchen blinds toward the driveway. At 3 exactly, another knock came at the front door. I did not open it. I just said through the wood that the listing was fake and the house was not for rent. The man outside said, "The owner told me to ask for the envelope." I stopped breathing for a second. "What envelope?" I asked. He said, "The lease packet." He said if his nephew was there, he'd know. I did not answer. After a pause, the man said, "Look, I already sent him the application fee." I told him to leave. He stayed another few seconds, then went back to his car. I looked out through the front curtain and watched him sit there with the engine running. He was typing on his phone. Less than a minute later, my own phone buzzed with another site message. "Tell him to check under the back flower pot." That message was not from the confused man in the car. It was from the listing account. The back flower pot was by our patio steps. Years earlier, my parents had actually hidden a spare key under it for about a month before deciding that was too obvious. There was no key there now, but the fact that whoever made the listing knew about that spot made my whole body go cold. I left the front window and went straight to the kitchen. Through the gap in the blinds, I could see the patio, the flower pot, the fence, and part of the detached shed at the back of the yard. At first, nothing moved. Then a man stepped out from behind the shed. Dark baseball cap, dark jacket. Standing still enough that if I had looked away too quickly, I would have missed him. He did not come toward the house. He just looked at the patio, then toward the side gate, then back at the kitchen window, like he was checking whether I had followed the message. Nolan pulled into the driveway almost at the same time. The man by the shed disappeared immediately. The car at the curb backed out and left so fast it threw gravel. When Nolan came inside, I did not even try to explain it calmly. I just pointed to the backyard and told him someone had been behind the shed. We checked from inside every downstairs room, but whoever it was had already gone. I never left for work that night. My father came home early, and by then the listing had been taken down. The messages were gone too. What stayed with me was not how many people came to the door. It was the realization that the fake listing had never really been about renting the house. It was a way to keep sending strangers to my porch, to make me answer the door over and over, to see whether I was alone, whether I would step outside, whether I would check the back flower pot just because a message told me to. The house was never what they wanted. The house was just how they tested who was inside it. The first person came to the side door after midnight. I remember the time because I was still awake in the living room with a bowl of cereal on the coffee table, half watching some movie I was not really paying attention to. My parents were out of town for 2 nights visiting my grandfather, and my younger sister was staying with a friend. I had the house to myself, which normally did not bother me. Our house sat on a corner lot, and because of the way it was built into a slope, there was a lower-level side entrance that opened into the basement laundry room. We almost never used it. The front door was for guests. The kitchen door was for us. The basement entrance was mostly there because the previous owners had converted part of the lower level into a workshop. So when I heard 3 knocks coming from that side of the house, I actually paused the TV because I was not sure I had heard it right. I got up, crossed the living room, and looked out through the narrow side window near the stairs. The side yard was dark except for the weak yellow light above the basement door. Standing on the concrete step below, it was a man in a dark jacket and baseball cap. I did not open it. I just called out through the glass and asked what he wanted. He stepped closer to the light and said, "I'm here for Marcus." I told him no one named Marcus lived there. Then he said, "He told me basement entrance. After 12. That sentence made me feel cold all at once. It was not just that he had the wrong house. It was that he said it like he had been given instructions that matched my house too well. I told him again he had the wrong address. He stood there for another second, then said, "This is 1147, right?" It was. I said yes, but there was no Marcus there. That seemed to annoy him more than surprise him. He took out his phone, looked down at something on the screen, then looked back at the door. He said corner house, basement door, after midnight. Then he turned and walked back to a dark sedan parked on the curb. I stood there watching until the car left. For a few minutes I just stayed in the kitchen, replaying the conversation in my head. I told myself the most likely explanation was that some idiot had sent him to the wrong address. But the specific details bothered me. Corner house, basement door, after midnight. That was not random. I checked that the basement door was locked, then checked it again. After that, I went upstairs, but I did not sleep much. The next night was normal until around 11:30. I was in my room doing homework when I heard tires crunch slowly over the gravel shoulder outside. Then came the sound of a car door closing. A minute later, footsteps moved along the side of the house. I was already up before the knocking started. went downstairs quietly and looked through the side window again. A different person was outside this time, younger than the first man, wearing a hoodie with the hood up. He had one hand in his pocket and kept glancing back toward the street. I asked what he wanted. He moved closer and said, "Tell him I'm here for the pickup." I did not answer right away. He looked irritated and added, "Marcus." He said use the lower entrance if the porch light's off. The porch light was off. The front of the house was dark because I had not turned that light on all evening. I told him there was no Marcus there and that he needed to leave. He looked up at the house, then back at the basement door, and for the first time, I saw uncertainty on his face. But even then, he did not seem to think he was at the wrong place. He seemed to think I was lying. Then he asked, "You his brother or something?" I said no. He stood there another second, then said, "He was here last week." That was the part that stayed with me. Not, "Someone was here last week." He was here. Like there was no doubt at all. He left after that, but I did not go back to my room. I sat in the kitchen for nearly an hour, staring at the side yard through the window over the sink. The next morning, I called my mother and told her what had happened both nights. At first, she thought it was just some kind of address mix-up, but when I repeated exactly what the second guy said, she went quiet. Then she asked me whether I had checked the basement. I had not. We used the lower level mostly for storage, and I rarely went down there unless I was doing laundry. The finished half had a couch, an old TV, shelves, and my dad's tools in the workshop room. There was also a little office space in one corner. I went down immediately after the call. At first, everything looked normal. The laundry room was empty. The workshop door was open. The couch still had the same folded blanket on the arm. Then I saw something on the desk in the corner office space. A disposable lighter. Bright green. Not ours. I stared at it for a second, then looked around the room more carefully. On the floor beside the desk was an empty energy drink can. In the trash bin were 2 crumpled fast food wrappers. Then I checked the basement door. The lock worked, but the strike plate had fresh scratches around it, like someone had been using a key that did not fit quite right, or forcing something thin into the gap. I went upstairs and checked the drawer by the kitchen phone where we kept spare keys. One was missing. That drawer was not hidden, just tucked under a stack of takeout menus and batteries. The thing that made it worse was realizing how little we used the basement. Someone could have gone in and out down there more than once, without us noticing anything at all, unless they left something obvious behind. That night, I did not stay there. I packed a bag and stayed with my friend Nolan. My parents came home early the next afternoon. My father changed every lock in the house that same day, including the basement deadbolt, and screwed a metal plate over the side window beside the door. He also took apart the basement desk drawers and found something else. A folded receipt. It was from a gas station about 20 minutes away, time-stamped 3 days earlier at 11:48 p.m. On the back, in pen, was our address. Under it were the words, "Corner house / lower door / lights off. I still do not know who Marcus was. I do not know if he ever actually came to our house, or if somebody else just started using the address because it fit whatever instructions they had been given. What I do know is that multiple strangers showed up certain they were in the right place, and they all knew about the one entrance we never used. That is what gets to me now. Not that someone had the wrong house, that someone knew enough about ours to make the wrong people believe it was the right one.